The United States says it will be watching Nigeria's 2027 general election very closely. But this is not simply about election observers or diplomatic statements. A senior American lawmaker is now suggesting that future security cooperation, an aspect of U.S. assistance to Nigeria, could increasingly depend on two issues: the conduct of Nigeria's election and concerns over religious freedom. Coming at a time when Nigeria is preparing for one of its most consequential elections in recent history, the remarks have added a new international dimension to the country's political landscape. The big question is this: why is the United States placing such emphasis on Nigeria's 2027 elections? And could Washington's position influence the future relationship between Africa's largest democracy and one of its most important international partners? Why Nigeria conducts its election independently? International partners often pay close attention because of the country's strategic importance to regional security, economic development, and democratic governance across Africa. The comments were made by U.S. Congressman Riley Moore during an interview with Nore TV. Responding to questions about Nigeria's upcoming elections, Moore said the United States would closely monitor how the elections are conducted. According to him, both he and the U.S. administration intend to pay careful attention to the integrity of the electoral process and the manner in which the elections are executed. Moore stated, "We are certainly going to be watching these results and how these elections unfold and how they are executed. And that's something that myself and the administration are going to be paying very close attention to." His remarks indicate that developments surrounding Nigeria's democratic process are receiving attention not only within Congress, but also within the current U.S. administration. The congressman went further by discussing ongoing legislative work in the U.S. House of Representatives. He explained that lawmakers were considering an appropriation bill containing provisions relating to Nigeria. According to Moore, the proposed legislation includes language addressing concern over the persecution of Christians, restricting on future security assistance to Nigeria, and conditions that the Nigerian government would need to meet. He also referred to legislation sponsored by Congressman Chris Smith, of which he is a co-sponsor, while emphasizing that the appropriation bill may have broader practical implications if it becomes law. According to Moore, the proposed legislation contains what he described as strong and aggressive language regarding future U.S.-Nigerian relations. He suggested that if enacted, some provisions will become legally binding and influence how future African assistance is provided. However, it is important to distinguish between a lawmaker's comments and official U.S. government policy. While Moore is an elected member of Congress and a co-sponsor of relevant legislation, any proposed bill must still pass through the U.S. legislative process and, where applicable, receive presidential approval before becoming law. The congressman also disclosed that he remains in regular contact with President Donald Trump and members of the administration regarding Nigeria. During the interview, Moore stated that he expected to meet President Trump later that day for dinner and intended to continue discussing Nigeria during those conversations. He described the issues surrounding Nigeria as important to the administration, although the White House has not separately issued a public statement confirming any specific policy changes based on Moore's remarks. To understand why these comments matter, it is important to appreciate Nigeria's strategic importance to the United States. Nigeria is Africa's most populous country and one of the continent's largest economies. It plays a central role in regional peacekeeping, counter-terrorism efforts, energy production, maritime security in Gulf of Guinea, and economic integration across West Africa. For decades, the United States and Nigeria have maintained extensive cooperation in areas including security, trade, education, healthcare, humanitarian assistance, and democratic governance. Because of this long-standing partnership, developments in Nigeria often receive significant attention from policymakers in Washington. Election integrity has also become an important component of American foreign policy in many regions of the world. Successive U.S. administrations, regardless of political party, have generally expressed support for credible elections, peaceful transfers of power, respect for constitutional institutions, and the protection of fundamental rights. Statements from members of Congress concerning elections in partner countries are therefore not unusual, particularly where strategic interests and democratic governance intersect. The issue of religious freedom, mentioned by Congressman Moore, represents another long-standing area of discussion between Nigeria and the United States. Various African lawmakers, advocacy groups, and international organizations have previously expressed concern about violence affecting religious communities in parts of Nigeria. Nigerian authorities, however, have consistently argued that much of the violence stems from criminality, terrorism, banditry, and communal conflicts rather than systematic government-sponsored religious persecution. Successive Nigerian governments have rejected accusations that the state discriminates against any religious group while acknowledging the country's broader security challenges. This differing perspective explains why discussions between both countries can sometimes become complex. Supporters of stronger conditions on foreign assistance argue that international partnership should encourage improvements in human rights, accountability, and democratic governance. They believe linking assistance to measurable reforms can strengthen institutions and protect vulnerable communities. Others caution that reducing security cooperation with Nigeria could unintentionally weaken efforts to combat terrorism, insurgency, organized crime, and regional instability. They argue that the security collaboration benefits both countries and should continue even as concerns over governance are addressed through diplomatic engagements. Political analysts also note that while international attention may influence diplomatic discussions, Nigeria's election remains the responsibility of Nigerian institutions. The Independent National Electoral Commission, political parties, security agencies, election observers, civil society organizations, and millions of Nigerian voters will ultimately determine the credibility of the electoral process. Foreign governments may express opinions, offer technical support, or observe developments, but they do not conduct Nigeria's elections. The timing of Moore's remarks is also significant because political activities are intensifying ahead of the 2027 elections. Major parties have begun submitting candidates' nominations, political alliances are taking shape, and attention is increasingly turning towards campaign strategy and electoral preparations. International statements issued during this period are therefore likely to attract greater public attention than they might at other times. Beyond the election themselves, the comments reflect the broader reality that Nigerian domestic development often carries international consequences. As Africa's largest democracy, the country's political stability affects investors' confidence, regional security, diplomatic relations, and economic cooperation across the continent. A peaceful, transparent, and credible election will strengthen Nigeria's democratic reputation internationally, while disputed outcomes could attract greater diplomatic scrutiny from partners around the world. Congressman Moore remarks therefore represent one perspective within the American political system at a time when legislation relating to Nigeria is under consideration. Whether the proposed measures eventually becomes law will depend on the outcome of the U.S. legislative process. At the same time, Nigeria's own institution will continue preparing for an election that remains one of the most significant democratic events of the African continent. As the countdown to 2027 continues, both domestic and international attention is expected to intensify. The conduct of the elections, the strength of democratic institutions, and the broader relationship between Nigeria and the United States will remain closely watched. The coming months will reveal whether diplomatic concerns translate into concrete policy changes or whether the long-standing partnership between both countries continues along each side established paths while navigating areas of disagreement. I am Chimezrim Okoro, and thanks for watching.